Hello and welcome to episode 51 of the Crash and Ride podcast. I'm Patrick Ferguson. I'm your host. This week's guest is Lemuel Hayes. Lemuel is a session drummer based in Nashville, Tennessee, and he's also my best friend. I've been wanting to get Lemuel on the show for a while, and it finally lined up that he was in town at the same time I was in town. We got to sit down and we had a really great talk. If this is your first episode of Crash and Ride is a long-form interview podcast where I talk to musicians who've survived anxiety, depression, and addiction. The idea was that if I could get together with musicians and we could have open and honest talks about what was really going on with us, maybe we could feel a little bit less alone in the world and all start to get better. Man, last week, I got the episode up on time on Saturday night. I had every intention of doing another song explication this week. For those of you who are new to the show, I do an interview every Saturday night, and then midway through the week, I do a song explication where I go end to end in a song I really love and talk about the personnel on the session, where and when it was recorded, and try to contextualize why it's important and why it's important to me. This week just came at me like a truck. My sweet daughter got the flu. She was in bed all week and home all week. My water heater blew up. I noticed that the water heater wasn't getting water as hot, and I thought, oh, well, I've replaced an element in the water heater before, so I put my work clothes on and wiggled up under the house, and as I got closer to the heater, I began to notice that there was mud in the crawl space, and it got deeper and more gumbo-like as I got to the heater, and it was awful. And I live way out here in the country. I like it out here, but your crawl space becomes like a critter space if you're not careful, and I'm not really. And so as I was clearing all the insulation off this busted water heater, there were a half dozen or more snake skins just hanging down like streamers at a party, and there was rat poop, and it was just, what a week it's been. I lost a big gig. We talked about that in the interview, not realizing that it was a foreshadowing for what the week would hold. When I talked to Lemuel on Monday, I guess it was, we talked about rejection and losing gigs, and then I got a call midway through the week that one of my big, more high-profile gigs was going away. I'm not bitter about it. There were some issues with that gig. It was kind of stressful sometimes, and I wasn't playing my best, and I understand why it happened, and I'm not mad, but we talk about it in the interview. When you lose a gig, when you're a side man, it's just like being stabbed in the heart. That said, this year's South by Southwest is going to be lit for me. I'm playing with 5/8, the power pop band I played drums for forever. I'm playing with Pinky Doodle Poodle, the Tokyo rock band I've played with for, I guess, a year and a half now, although they're on the wrong side of the Pacific right now, struggling to get their visa renewed. But they're going to be back in time for South by Southwest. I'm also playing with two different bands from New Delhi, Komorebi, the New Delhi trip-hop band that I played with at South by Southwest last year, and then they passed the word on to the band Men Who Pause, and they're coming here, and I'm playing drums for them too. I'm probably going to play 13 or 14 times in a week at South by Southwest, 2 or 3 shows a day, every day. There's some people who I really, really love who live in Austin. My friend Trey, my friend Patrick, and his sweet wife, Geneva. You guys, if you want to hang out, let's try to jam it in sometime between gigs or maybe late at night after it's all said and done, and I'm back at the Airbnb with my feet up and steam coming off of my brain. So yeah, it's been a wild week, and I'm a little sad about losing that gig, but I was thinking about it, and I'm sure that the next paying gig is right around the corner. I'll probably never think about that gig again after that with anything but fondness and love for the people involved. But the money hit is going to be tough. So if you're a touring musician and you're thinking, oh man, I need a drummer for a few shows, and I'm available, just give me a shout. Okay, I got a couple of quick announcements. Crash and Ride is brought to you in part by Greer Amplification. Greer Amps builds the best boutique effects pedals available. If you're looking for an overdrive, boost, fuzz, compressor, or tremolo that is rugged, road-tested, and at home on stage, in the studio, or in your living room, Greer has a pedal for you. Nick and his staff strive to build the best products around with the best tone you've ever heard. They believe in their products and they stand behind them too, backing each one up with a lifetime warranty to the original owner. Each Greer Amps product is hand-built in Athens, Georgia, USA. Go to www.greeramps.com or visit your favorite music retailer today. Crash and Ride is also brought to you in part by Jittery Joe's, a local coffee roaster based in Athens, Georgia. They have a special espresso blend called Crash and Ride. You can get Crash and Ride espresso from my website at crashandride.com. crashandridepodcast.com/store. You can go there and specify whether you want your Crash and Ride Espresso whole bean or ground, and I'll ship it right out to you. You can also get Crash and Ride t-shirts there. We have black or blue t-shirts with the Crash and Ride logo on them with the Loud Guitar Save Lives slogan kind of around it. It looks really cool. You should go check it out. That's crashandridepodcast.com/store. I will be getting a case of the espresso this week, partially for my own personal consumption, officer, and the rest I will be sending out. So let me know if you want to get some espresso this week. It's going to be really fresh. Before we jump into this interview, I should note that the terrible news came down yesterday that Andy Gill, the amazing guitar player for the punk band Gang of Four, passed away over the last few days, and it's just incredibly sad. I've been fortunate enough to know the drummer of Gang of Four, Hugo Burnham, over the last few years, well, actually a couple of decades now, and it's been really hard for him. It's been hard for me to see him so sad. You know, when you start a band, you basically marry a bunch of weirdos when you're just school-aged, and then you stick together if you're lucky for the rest of your life. And keep those guys in your thoughts. The surviving members of Gang of Four are probably really suffering right now, and it's a terrible thing. I hate to hear it. Andy was way too young. If I'm lucky enough to do a song explication this week, it's probably going to be one of my favorite Gang of Four songs, so stay tuned for that. Okay, Lemuel Hayes, one of my favorite people in the world. Nashville-based session drummer, really great photographer, really eloquent speaker about his depression and anxiety. He's somebody I talk to every day. I have a very close-knit little community of drummers. Him, Jake, who helps me with this program, a couple of other people who live here in Athens that I talk to whenever I've got something on my mind. These are my guys. And Lemuel is just, he's a great guy. You can hear very early in the episode my poor flu-sick daughter calling me from the other room. I edited out the part where I had to run and get her a popsicle and bring it to her. We sat here in my living room on a brisk, bright, cold day and just talked it out. We talked about the kind of childhood that sets you up for codependency. We talked about what it's like to lose gigs. We talked about what it's like to worry all the time about not getting the next gig and struggles just putting a schedule together and money together. And it's a really good talk, I think, for session musicians to just like talk honestly about this weird walking on eggshells life of trying to cross every T and dot every I and keep gigs and get gigs, and how like if you've got some like anxiety, like that's going to ratchet it up to insane levels. So I think this was a really good episode. Let's jump into our interview with Lemuel Hayes. All right, I'm here with Lemuel Hayes. This is the third time we started this interview.
It's the charm.
Yeah. Lemuel is a session drummer currently based in Nashville. He has played with Cindy Wilson from the B-52s, Alicia Witt. He's been in the band Berlin. He's played with Nicki Bluhm, a million other. Reed Turchi. He's constantly on the road. He's one of my oldest friends, and I'm really glad to have him here. Welcome, Lemuel.
Hello.
Well, we've already done this once, and for some reason Pro Tools died on me, so we're going to just start over.
You mean Pro Tools be unstable?
It's been rock solid for months on this computer. Now I don't know what happened today. I think that drive is ready to be retired. That's what it is. So you spent most of 2019 on the road.
Yeah. I think it's probably going to end up being most, yeah.
And you moved to Nashville, as we covered already, 6 years ago?
Yep. I'm like 2 weeks away from my anniversary. Maybe not even 2 weeks. It's pretty close.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would have to go back and look, but really hit the lottery the first time with my landlord. The best landlord I've had ever still.
Oh, yeah?
The first guy, yeah. Rick Shell. Great dude. Rolled up and I had a Chicago Drum Exchange hoodie on and he had an RCA Records jacket on. It was all it took was that and that I had owned a house before. And he was like, "Oh, cool, you won't destroy my home. Let's do this."
He's not still your landlord, is he?
No, I wish. It would be great. But he's doing all right. He had a little medical issue a while back, but he's doing well. I haven't seen him in a minute, but I still talk to him.
Nashville's kind of a rental town. There's so many people who've moved there to play music or moved there to make music or moved there to be part of the music industry, and everybody's constantly trying to... It's gotten really expensive, hasn't it?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Definitely very expensive. I mean, I don't even want to think about what the house that I lived in then is worth in just a 6-year time difference. I'm sure it's gone up at least $400 to $500 just because.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's also a lot of rentals because if you actually made money in the industry, your accountant's going to tell you to put it somewhere.
Right.
So yeah, definitely a lot of landlords that are musicians, which is cool. It could definitely be a worse situation.
So you spend so much time on the road. It seems, I mean, I've been through this because, I did 200 dates a year for like 6 years. And you spend all this money to have a place to put your stuff, and you put your head on your own pillow, like, every couple of months you get 4 or 5 days at home.
Yeah. It definitely feels a little futile at times. I think if my life situation were different and also the nature of my gig were different, I would probably just have a storage space and I would get an Airbnb when I was home. Yeah. I think it seems a little silly, but I mean, if it was going to be something like I was gone as much last year as if I was going to do that ad infinitum, then it would just make more sense unless I bought my house and just had roommates.
Yeah, I mean, by the same token, though, like when I was doing that many dates, it was really important for me to come home sometimes and put my head down. Like to have my own space, my own coffee pot, like in a place that was mine where I could sit around in my underwear and like let the steam kind of rise off of my brain for a couple of days. And I don't know if I could do that in an Airbnb.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely fair as well. I don't know. I just have no idea how I feel about any of it really anymore in terms of having a home and stuff like that, because I don't really have a ton of rituals when I am home, so maybe that's a lot of why it doesn't really feel like it matters.
Yeah.
I kind of just treat being home, I do get to sleep in the same bed, and I have other equipment that's there that I can mess with or do whatever I need to do, but I don't sit on my porch and drink coffee or anything like that. That's not really my MO. Yeah. I'm a little too busy body for that.
Yeah. So you play with Reed Turchi as part of the kudzu duo. You're going to do a ton of shows with him in 2020, but also he's got this partnership with this ex-con poet thing. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so he did this record. I didn't even know it was happening until it was over. But it was, I think, a day or maybe 2 days. Basically, they just plowed through all these works that the poet wanted. The poet is Dwayne Betts, Reginald Dwayne Betts, and yeah, he did that, and it's slated to come out at some point this year. I don't really know a ton about it.
And so you guys will temporarily suspend the kudzu duo stuff to tour behind that too?
That seems to be maybe the loose plan. I don't really know. Since I'm not direct on that in terms of it's a Reed thing. And I'm not in direct discussions about the booking part. So if it shows up, it shows up. If it doesn't, it doesn't.
So you and I have talked a lot. I mean, we talk every day.
Pretty much,
It's going to be kind of hard to drop the average listener into the middle of our sort of stream of conversation, but you struggled most of your adult life with anxiety and depression.
Yeah.
Do you feel like that's exacerbated by being on tour all the time?
That's a question that I struggle with the answer to, and I don't really know the answer. It's sometimes I think that it's probably not helping it, but also sometimes it is a distraction, which is, I don't know, in the case of it all, sometimes is also what you need. But I don't really know, because I get pretty antsy if I am just in a stationary place. The only time I've really ever had a straight job that was 40 hours in that wasn't like retail or something heavily social. It was weird, and I think that it's also a number of years ago, so it's hard for me to look back on it with any kind of understanding, because I don't think I understood what all it was and how multi-layered the emotional situation that I have was then.
What was that job?
I did data entry for a small company, and it was kind of like some IT as well, and a little bit of a catch-all. But those were my main roles. And when you work for a really small business, you just kind of end up filling gaps whenever something happens.
My Mantle Clock is making its first live appearance in an interview. This is the clock I've talked about a few times in the intro of each episode about how I've got this clock that belonged to my grandfather. That's the first time it's chimed during an interview. So that means it's noon here. That was 12 bells.
There it is.
I love that clock. I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole about that clock, but it really reminds me of my grandparents' house, which is why I'm so overjoyed to have it here and working.
Sure, I can get that. I was, where was I? I was near somewhere in Nashville, and a church bell rang, and it's clearly automated, but it's interesting how we have the melody we've all ascribed to. This is when the bell is about to tell you the time.
Right.
The dun 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 dun, which my grandparents also had a huge grandfather clock that did that every day. Yeah. And that's what I think about every time I hear that sound. So I get it. I feel where you're coming from.
You were super close to your grandparents.
Yeah. This was on the maternal side that had the grandfather clock, which I wouldn't say that I wasn't. I was fairly close to them. I was definitely closer to my paternal, as they lived a quarter mile from my parents.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I definitely spent most of my childhood. My parents would drop me off there, and then they would take me to school. I would get off the bus there, or my grandfather would pick us up from school and take us there, and we would be there until our parents got home every day.
That's you and your brother?
Yeah.
We've talked a lot about how your anxiety and depression kind of started in childhood.
Yeah.
That was already kind of part of your life then?
Sure. Yeah, definitely. And, I mean, it's a little hard to know exactly where the impetus is. It's all just a series of events that just stack upon each other until it pushes it over the threshold. But, yeah, there's all kinds of stuff. It's more or less upbringing, and it's you do the best you can as an adult trying to sift through it all. I mean, at this point, I'm staring down 30 years of memories and the further back you go, the fuzzier they are. Yeah. Not just because of time, but also because of your ability to comprehend a situation. So you interpreted the information coming into you in a different way, and it's stored that way. So you have to kind of reparse through all that as well. But
do you remember the first time that you were aware that you were less happy than you probably should be?
I think the first time that I really had a hard time being motivated in any way was I was in second grade, and I don't really remember much of that year, which is kind of the interesting part of it all as well. But I remember that's probably the year I did the worst in school, and I just really struggled, and I kind of got my bearings towards the end, but I don't really know what the issue was. But I would say that was probably the first time. Then
what was going on at home that year?
I don't know. That's pretty close to when my parents were building a house and we were moving. I mean, it was literally just in front of where we currently lived at the time, so it wasn't some big grand thing. And I don't know if just the impending stress of that or I don't really know.
Building a house is incredibly stressful for couples because you have to make literally 10,000 decisions.
Yeah. And I know there were some complications that I just remember there being, the idea of complications, but I don't know what they were.
Yeah. Well, you wouldn't at second grade.
Right, yeah, exactly. But I guess it hasn't really been discussed since then, and I never asked.
It's kind of like being in a canoe. You really find out what your relationship is all about if you're on a canoe trip together.
Yeah.
Because it's not really about keeping the boat straight in the water. It's about the interaction of trying to keep the boat straight in the water. And I've known building a house to break up more than one marriage. Because the 10,000 decisions of like, what do you want your electrical sockets to be, vertical or horizontal? White, bone, off-white, like, light switches, push button, standard on a rheostat, like literally 10,000 decisions that shouldn't really be all that consequential, and yet the fact that you're making with someone who potentially you have stresses with can be really disruptive. Yeah,
definitely the sum of the stress is greater than the individual.
Right.
Yes, I have no doubt.
So I'm not a disinterested observer, so this is me sort of knowing you for many years, but the way that I have seen you manifest anxiety and depression is to shut down.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think it's perceived as shutting down. It's no different than whenever you've seen some cartoon and there's an intruder and they just put the entire place on lockdown, and every, sphincter-like spiral metal door closes and big barricades come down. It's no different than that, and it becomes very cold, and then it catches a lot of people off guard, especially if it's really sudden, which can happen. And it's pretty hard for me to stop it at times.
My experience with that kind of detachment is it's often a defense mechanism.
Oh, of course.
If you have a manipulative person in your family of origin, they will take any emotional expression as a means to manipulate you. So if you can shut down, go completely internal instead of external, you don't give them like a hook they can grab a hold of and sling you by.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's not unlike how a defense lawyer would tell you to just sew up every loose end you possibly can and cut off any amount of information flow in that regard.
Do you have a lot of experience with defense lawyers?
No, but I've watched a lot of Law and Order, you know.
I was thinking back, like, how would you know that? I don't remember anything about that.
No. I mean, it's just that. It's all of it is just defense. The nature of defense, going back even to castles, is to limit. That's the whole purpose of it, is to limit access through physical terrain, through number of entrances and exits. That's just the name of the game.
So the withdrawal thing is basically retreating into Fortress Lemmy as a defense mechanism.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about like what you think the circumstances were leading up to you feeling the need to like build castle walls.
Definitely unpredictable rules more than anything, or a constantly changing goalposts or boundaries or this or that, in that regard, in that whole world. So, for example, I think the biggest, aside from the shut down kind of nature of myself, the other major development of my psyche that is a direct cause of my upbringing is a very ironclad memory, because you have to, as a kid, if you have these constantly moving goalposts or rules that aren't always very clear, you just treat them as more. It's not just rule 1. There's rule 1A, rule 1B, rule 1C, rule 1D, and the list keeps going. So you as a child are trying to keep up with it. You're trying to make the list so that you know what not to do, what you can do, and you're just trying to keep track of all of it. So you kind of have this insane memory, and that's something that my brother and I share. And it like anything that's a psychological development, it could be nature as well. It just I think that there is a nature component to it, and we were probably a little predetermined to have that sort of thing. But I do think that it was exacerbated by an unpredictable parenting style.
In episode 10, I talked to Evan Rowe, who's also a drummer, coincidentally enough, and he talked about having a parent with an explosive temper that would go off for no reason, and how he was constantly trying to anticipate what the trigger was going to be.
Sure.
So he was trying to dot every I, cross every T,
yes.
And ultimately that's a fool's errand because it's always going to be something.
Yeah, but you don't have the context or the understanding to really grasp that as a child.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that's the attempt. The attempt is it's no different than fight or flight. It's you're trying to not get hurt in that kind of terms. It's, in this case, it's emotional distress. So you don't want to be yelled at. You don't want to disappoint anyone. It's just, it becomes so convoluted that you develop this generalized, latent anxiety that's always there.
Yeah.
That also turns into in a lot of people, I think that tends to turn into perfectionism. And there's a little of that in my world, for sure.
Yeah. Well, as a session musician, there's a lot of that.
Yeah, I guess I just also mean psychologically.
Yeah.
So
sort of the earliest manifestation of this was doing poorly in second grade, but like, did you continue to see things like poor school performance or anything else that like you look back on and go, oh, well, that was because I was depressed and anxious?
I don't know. There, it was the 90s, so everybody's favorite school thing, if your kid was intelligent, was to put them into the gifted program, which I did enjoy. The problem with it was that I wanted to do that work more than I wanted to do my schoolwork, so that in fourth grade was the next time that there was kind of a moment of weirdness, I would say, with my own life in that, and I was pulled out of it, which was it was a complicated emotion. That's more or less what I remember about it, because I enjoyed it, but I understood I still had to do these other things. It was just hard for me to find the balance of doing the thing I wanted to do, but doing the schoolwork that's required from your standard classes.
Do we ever talk about the fact that the same thing happened to me?
No.
Yeah, I got pulled out of a gifted program in fifth grade.
Yeah.
I got put in a gifted program, and then there was this one day of the week where I was special, and there were interesting and engaging tasks, and the rest of the week was just tedium. And I wasn't interested in any of that, and my parents were going through a divorce, and that was all very complicated. And yeah, my grades dropped so low that they were like, well, we're going to take the one thing that you enjoy and make school a complete drag after that.
Yeah, I wish that I could say that it was clear cut in one way or another like that. It was just that I didn't do that well. And when I think back to fourth grade, I definitely can remember more about being in gifted class than I can any of my other classes. And that was I think that was the first year that I went to a different teacher for a different subject outside of the gifted thing. That was just how fourth grade was structured.
Yeah. And
I could not tell you anyone other than my homeroom teacher's name. I actually was thinking about that recently. I had most of my courses with her, but I remember I went to someone else for math. Can't tell you that math professor's name.
And your home life was?
It was what it was. It was kind of always the same. It was School was number one. I kind of played baseball. I kind of played football. I wasn't really any good at either of them. I didn't really have any hobbies other than like video games. From the time that I was 5 until about 13, I think. That may not be accurate, but sometime around there, we had a chicken house, and that was a responsibility. As I got older, it became more and more responsibility of mine, as I'm the oldest. And
how big a chicken house?
I think it's 300 yards. So
how many chickens?
Oh, I don't know, but a lot, thousands.
Yeah, and so you're getting carcasses out of there, and
oh yeah. I mean, I remember one time there was every once in a while you'll have these weird diseases that crop up. One that's pretty common in chicken houses. Well, not pretty common, but it in terms of really bad things to have show up in a house, it's the one you always want to not. It's dermatitis, which is, I don't really remember exactly what it is, but it will kill them very quickly and in large numbers. And I remember there was a weekend that I filled a Nissan pickup truck bed with dead chickens that were probably 3/4 of the maturity they would have been before they were taken to a processing plant. It's a lot of chickens.
If you're not from North Georgia, you may not be aware that it's sort of a cottage industry to like pour a concrete slab and fill a house full of chickens and make a little extra money that way. And what you do is you raise these chickens from like little fuzzy ball of yellow fluff to roasting size, and then they all get loaded in a truck and taken to the chicken plant.
Correct.
Did you load cages too, or
no? The company. So you also grow for a larger company like Pilgrims or Wayne Farms or one of the others, and they normally send a crew that does all of that. They have a crew that brings them and loads them into the house. Then they also have a secondary crew later on that's going to come and collect them all. And in the interstitial zone, they have field reps that come out and check on everything, and they'll like pull a chicken and take it with them to do testing on and stuff like that. And if there's any kind of if they do have some kind of, let's say he pulls one or there's a dermatitis issue, that's who administers the medication, and it's administered through the water supply. You have a whole system at one entrance of the house, and they insert the medication there if that's required, into the water.
It's wild the things you sort of learn on a non-traditional, like, or non-urban or suburban upbringing.
Yeah, I mean, it is very bizarre. And so I mean, but I guess in how that ties back to childhood, there was always something to do. I was definitely a video game kid, because I mean, it's the 90s. I grew up with a Nintendo from age, like, I don't know, 4. My older cousins had one, and I would play it with them. And then you had the console, when the console wars really started, of PlayStation and Nintendo and all that, and Sega. So I grew up in that, and they were definitely a prominent thing, and that was more or less what I spent any free time I had or money on. I was very rarely allowed to go to friends' houses.
What's that?
That's just the rule, man.
Yeah.
If my parents didn't know them, then I didn't go. Yeah. But my parents didn't ever go like anywhere to meet anyone, so they didn't know anyone, so I didn't go.
You don't feel like that might have been sort of a way of protecting the sort of pathology of the home?
Yeah, I mean, it's it's definitely that. I don't know that it was conscious in that regard, but it will do that. That is also a result of that being a rule.
Yeah. And as a teenager, did you start manifesting depression a little more overtly?
I think that I just worked through it in terms of physical work.
Yeah.
I would struggle a lot with whenever moments of rejection happened, whether those be in the social realm or the romantic realm, or even in any of the rest of it. Like, if just anywhere that it could happen, but it didn't. I had a good friend network, especially later in high school, and that definitely helped a lot. And I just kind of always, I did school. Toward in the last, like my senior year, I had random jobs, and I would do that. And then on the weekend, I mean, I would kind of hang out with those friends, and that was what I did, and it was cool. And I think that helped a lot.
I was already partying at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah. Those weekends were often spent like on the hunt for pills or weed.
Yeah. Somehow I don't, I don't really have a good answer for how I avoided it, other than I think it didn't seem like a thing I wanted to do. I mean, I also grew up in this is your brain on drugs, this is your brain, that whole campaign. So I think that probably, and there was also DARE, which was not very successful in a nationwide way, but I do think it had some form of impact on, it works probably in areas where you don't have easy access to that stuff, and you have enough to not feel like you want to explore it.
Let's talk about rejection for a minute.
Sure.
Because it seems to be something that is like a demon for both of us. It seems to be something that is like a recurring speed bump for both of us when rejection happens. And I realized, and here I am midway through life. I'm past probably the middle point of the years that I'll have on this planet, and just realized recently that the two most profound rejections I can experience are historically have been romantic. Of course, I've been happily married for a long time now, but also professional. Like being turned down from a gig or fired from a gig or losing a gig can put me in a spin like nothing else.
Oh yeah. I mean, these days I've gotten a little better in the romantic regards. I also think that's a little bit of just therapy, not with that. It's not been driven. The therapy has not been driven towards that, but I just think that it gives me better tools to understand the situation. I do have a period of heightened feelings about it, and they will continue to come in waves, but it is a little bit more manageable. The rejecting in a playing standpoint is considerably harder for me to navigate, and it's been very difficult in a lot of ways, and I haven't really developed my own personal system for how to deal with it.
It's heavy. I mean, because I think that outside of our families of origin, the way that a lot of musicians define themselves is through their identity as a musician, and to lose a gig
100%
is a real blow against my self-esteem. When it happens, it's crushing.
Yes. It feels like it's not. It feels like it's you in a complete sense, not just an action or some other kind of singular thing that you could compartmentalize away. It feels like it's a rejection of your whole being.
I think it's because we invest so much of ourselves in our ability and our viability as musicians.
Absolutely. And because I think you have to give up a lot of things to take that role in your life.
Yeah.
You sacrifice a lot of relationships of different kinds just due to the nature of you being gone.
Yeah, so you have this idea, like I've given up, like you don't have a dog because you can't, because you're gone so much.
Right.
You don't have your romantic life's been rocky, due a lot in part because you're struggling with depression, anxiety, but also because you're gone all the time. So there's people who don't want to be involved with someone who's not home. So you give up so much, and then like the rejection and gigs could be so arbitrary.
Yes. Yes.
And then one day you're just like out of a gig and you're like, man, I've given up so much and here I am. I don't even have the fucking gig.
Yeah. Yeah. And the nature of each gig also plays a factor into it in terms of, you know, were you kind of the regular? Were you a sub? What happened and things like that. I think at least for me, they definitely factor into how hard it hits home. Yeah, I mean, 2019 was pretty tough in that regards. I got let go from a gig with really definitely no warning and really no explanation other than I wasn't a good fit after like 80 shows, which is a bizarre statement to me personally, but you know, it doesn't change the reality of the artist that felt that way, and I understand that, but it is a hard place to navigate because you don't have a starting point or any kind of you're literally just dropped onto another world of, I have no idea what I did wrong here. And maybe I should have asked, but there's no guarantee I would have gotten an answer, or if I had gotten an answer that it was a truthful answer. That's always the thing too, because normally if someone's not willing to tell you what you did wrong initially, they're not going to necessarily tell you even if you ask.
Yeah.
It becomes too political.
Yeah. And also, you know, when you have managers involved and management companies and there's money on the line, there's also the possibility that it could become litigious and then nobody wants to be involved in that.
Yeah, precisely. So it becomes a very complicated emotional thing to unwrap. And it definitely dimed my anxiety because my initial gut is just like that it has to be about the playing. So I really was in my own head about my playing, even on gigs, and that was not the move. And I definitely bombed a pretty important gig for an artist and was replaced. It was just a sub thing, but I was still replaced on it. And I feel really bad about that, mostly because my problems became someone else's stressor, which is not really, that's the number one thing I try to avoid as a player. I know that I have these issues and they are what they are. I just, it's not their problem, and I hate that it made it theirs.
It's interesting, the parallel, though. We were talking about, like, you grow up with I'm going to put some words in your mouth just for the purposes of the shorthand of this conversation, but like a narcissistic parent who you're trying to dot every I and cross every T, but the rules are constantly changing. It's not entirely dissimilar to playing in a pickup band or a session band or a sideman position where you're trying to figure out what the unspoken rules are and what the needs of this night versus the needs of that gig we played 2 weeks ago are. And
100%. I would say the number one most difficult thing about working as a sideman is not learning the songs always. Sometimes it is. That's pretty rare. Sometimes it's keeping the songs separate mentally because they just sound so similar, or there's just so many.
Yeah.
A lot of times, more than anything, especially if there's tracks involved and I have to fire them off, it's really the thing I think that is the hardest for me on those gigs and that I sweat the most is when is the optimum time to start them, because you have to learn the banter style of the artist, which isn't necessarily their normal personality style, and you only get that 30 to 75 minute window every night of total time on stage.
Yeah.
And in rehearsal, they never really want to do that whole song and dance, even though it's really helpful for me to kind of get a feel of what's going on.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, all those things, and that's just a little microcosm. That's not the millions of other musical decisions that they want to have happen, and visual decisions in terms of movement on stage, or not movement, or tones and all that stuff.
Have I ever told you about the final night of the Psychedelic Furs tour I was on?
I don't think so.
We played Costa Mesa, California, and now on that tour we were playing "Love My Way," psychedelic first song that was on one of their first 3 albums, and it has like a marimba part, the bump 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 bump.
Yeah,
and that part was on a mini disc player that I had, because we didn't have, like, we couldn't trigger tracks.
right.
You were saying fire off tracks. Some people may not know what Lemuel's talking about, but he will have a tablet or some other like computer interface where he can start backing tracks that are used to supplement the artist performance, and supplement the artist performance live. And that's just a common practice now. But we didn't have that. We had a mini disc player, and I would hit play, and then I would get an 8 count. There was a left and right channel, and the right channel just had the marimba part. The left channel had a click track for me, and it would give me 8 counts: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and I would count everybody in on the second 4 of the 8, and the whole thing would start. Right, we would all start playing "Love My Way,"
which also factors into what I was talking about, like feeling out the banter, because it's not, you don't start right when you press play. Then there's the delay of you getting the click for 4. Then you count everyone in, and there's this kind of awkward 2 seconds.
Right.
Which is kind of like if someone talks to you in a bathroom. 2 seconds feels like an eternity.
So with the psychedelic first, fortunately, that song usually followed another million seller. So there was a lot of audience noise that you could kind of just like, okay, well, I think that's the peak, right?
Sure.
And I would count everybody in. In Costa Mesa, California, just before we went on stage, the local crew killed power to the main board and the sub mixes for monitoring and everything. And when they came back up, they were zeroed. And so
sick.
Yeah, Trish, the front of house engineer, she was amazing. Managed to build most of the mix back, but the one thing that wasn't accounted for was the fold back on the left channel of the mini disc player, so I didn't have a count.
Oh, God.
So we finish whatever the song before Only You and I, or whatever the psychedelic first song was before Love My Way, and I hit play on the mini disc player, and I had just enough time to think, that count should have started by now.
And then there it is.
And then the song started through the mains, enormous marimba part, and everyone on stage is standing there just looking at me blankly like,
what the fuck?
Where's the count?
Yeah.
And I stopped it. I thought, I must have missed it.
Of course. Of course.
Yeah, so that moment on stage where you're thinking that was my fault, had to be my fault. So I hit play again, and it happened again, exactly as it did before. And I just tried to count everybody in. I thought, well, we all know the song. We could just jump in on the second measure. And then Richard Butler, lead singer of Psychedelic Furs, incredibly kind and generous man, but also very concerned with things being perfect on stage, waved me to a stop and the rest of the band. And he said, let's go to the next song. You know that one, don't you?
Yeah.
It was a great moment.
I'm sure.
It became clear after the show what had happened. It was the last show of the tour. It was not great.
Went out with a bang.
Yeah. I was not... I think this has nothing to do with that, but I've not played any shows with Psychedelic First since.
Yeah, I mean, in the case of the gig that I bombed, there was a set list change, which, isn't the biggest deal, but when you're doing tracks, and this is maybe part of my problem, I kind of spend the tail end of the other song, like I spend a second saying, okay, this is how this next one goes. I need to kind of like prep this. It's going to give me, this one counts in 8 and then 8 instead of 4 and 4, and just those things. And so then when it gets shifted, I got flustered, and it was like someone just turned the amp to 11 and literally broke the knob off, and that was it. It was all this to spiral down from there. I wasn't really able to regain my composure, which is all on me completely in terms of, you're a professional, and that's the whole thing, is to keep your shit under control, for lack of a better way to put it.
The problem with gigs that are really important to you is that when you have anxiety, those are the hardest ones to stay cool on.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
So when did you start therapy?
I did it for the first time. I still lived here in Athens. I guess 2011 or 2012 was my first instance in it.
So no time during like your adolescence or teen years?
No. That was never even like a... The only thing I knew about therapy was from The Critic.
The TV show?
Yeah. Because he goes to his
John
therapist.
Lovett TV show?
Yeah. That was all I knew about it. And
so what got you there?
I was dating a master's of psychology student, and she suggested it. I had a pretty major I worked for my parents at the time, and I had a pretty major confrontation where my dad said a pretty gnarly thing to me at work, and I just didn't really know how to handle it. In the moment I got super angry and I didn't really speak to him. For basically unless it was absolutely required. But that was definitely a schism in our relationship that I don't think is ever gonna be repaired at this point. That's almost 10 years ago at this point. So,
what did he say?
It was during the Zimmerman trial for the Trayvon Martin, and
yeah,
I simply added that I felt the prosecution was going to argue that Zimmerman waived his right to stand his ground because once the 911 dispatch told him to stand down, effectively, that was going to be their legal argument. That's all I said. And he said my line of thinking was everything that was wrong with the world. And coming from a man who, that was the primary thrust for us as children, is to do well in school, like effectively saying your mind is your best, is your number one asset. It just undermined everything he had ever preached to me as a kid, and I pretty much just lost it. I told him he could fuck off, and I left work. Didn't come back that day. My job was more or less stuff that could kind of be done during off hours, so I just maximized the time that I was, minimized the time I was there during times he was there.
It seems like that's not such an uncommon schism right now between boomer parents and their Gen X kids, is this idea that it's not just like we're no longer talking about the law, and we're no longer talking about privilege, and we're no longer talking about politics anymore. It's this sense of identity amongst upper middle class white people who've kind of had the say of everything for so long that they have to consider other viewpoints, and there's a lot of hostility there.
Yeah.
But also, like we were talking about earlier, it's not really about the thing.
No, it's not about the thing. Because I wasn't even really I was purely stating a factual, I guess it was an opinion, but it wasn't really a judgment opinion on the situation. In terms of where I stood, it was just purely how I felt the approach of the prosecution was going to go. As pretty vanilla as it could have been. So it was, it is what it is.
And then he laid everything that's wrong in the world at your feet.
Oh yeah.
Perfectly reasonable.
Totally reasonable.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I just didn't really know how to process it. He wrote me, I might have wrote a letter first. I don't really remember the order of events. I tend to write letters with my parents and with most people. I get caught up in the moment and I lose my train of thought, and I don't always, because of the kind of unpredictable upbringing, I definitely have a lot of corralling in the word choice and phrasing that I use to make sure I have covered every kind of, I've really truly narrowed down what I'm trying to say exactly. A lot of caveats in ways. So
you're spending a lot of time thinking and speaking defensively.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So I'm basically trying to build exactly what I'm trying to say. And that's harder to do in real time for me, and it causes me a lot of stress if I am not able to adequately achieve it. And, there's also regularly being interrupted in any kind of discussion. Usually people are a little too heated in those moments to allow a thoughtful statement to happen like that. So I tend to write letters. And I probably wrote one first that sounds kind of like my MO, and then it just got thrown in my face that, like, he couldn't believe his child would tell him to fuck off, and I was just like, cool, we're done here, I guess. This will never be really resolved.
And that sent you to therapy?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I guess that was kind of the thing. It was pretty stressful at the time. It was definitely hurtful. It's not in that moment. I guess it wasn't undifferent than the getting fired from a gig. You have your mind is effectively in my headspace. My mind is my greatest asset, and for it to be completely disregarded like that was really difficult for me to deal with. So that was a little tough. That was I guess the main thing for me.
Yeah.
Which is what sent me there, and then ultimately just became one of those yeah, I needed to be here. And my therapist here in town was great. I started on a really strong point, and my therapist now is also very great. I definitely had some not great ones in the intermediary.
Yeah.
So, I got into a shouting match with one.
What?
Yeah, his point wasn't wrong, but there's just, there's ways to go about stuff. And his thing was that my parental, at the time, my interaction with them was very unhealthy, and that the number one thing I could do to help myself was to completely cut them out of my life. And I mean, as nice as that and as easy as that sort of sounds, if you just take it on a surface level, it's just not realistic, unfortunately, because of the way that my world was, especially at the time, was structured. And that doesn't really help. I also felt like that wasn't the best advice to be throwing around. I don't know. There's so many other things that you could go to before you have to get to that point.
It almost sounds like that therapist is talking to a past version of themselves.
Exactly. And that's definitely why it ended up in a shouting match, because I was just like, there's too many other things we can do in between here and there. You're going full nuclear here. And there's plenty of other options, and it just escalated, and then I just never went back. I actually drove by it was a really weird place that they were trying to make it was an old house that was a studio, and they were trying to rent out sections of it for different stuff. And I drove past it the other day randomly, and they had torn down the section that we had our meetings in, and I was like, well, that's appropriate. It should have been a good sign. The first day that I ever went to that therapy, I was his last client of the day, and he was pulling out, and he pulled into another car.
He backed into another car?
He pulled into traffic and pulled into another car in that moment. And I remember,
I guess it's important to remember that these therapists are human beings just like we are.
Oh, absolutely.
And oftentimes, well, the thing I've always said about advice is I don't believe in it. I don't believe in advice. I believe that you should share your experience. the things that made you feel stronger, the things that gave you hope, as opposed to telling me what to do, because
yes,
most times when people are giving advice, they're talking to some past or future version of themselves, or they're trying to control your behavior. And it sounds to me like you uncorked this guy's primary pathology.
Yeah. I mean, I think it was just too close to home, and that maybe he had never had a patient as similar, maybe, and that's what the deal was. And I at least had enough. Sometimes I do wonder what would have happened had I not had already some other therapy background, and how I would have approached that situation, and if I would have been as resistant to what he said, because it was not good. It wasn't a good mode of attack for the problem. And if I had actually tried to do it, and how that, just one of those millions of thought experiments that we can all go through on any given day.
Yeah. It seems to me like you have been kind of in this situation where, and we've known each other a long time, and my listeners don't have the benefit of having had the incredible privilege of being your friend for so long, but you've had a series of relationships where intimacy was difficult because you have to be so guarded just because of your background. And there often comes a point in the intimacy level where you don't feel safe anymore and you shut down. And
that's fair. It becomes a point where for whatever reason, I don't feel safe anymore.
Yeah.
And that's not any shortcoming of the partner or the person. It is purely a manifestation of just my own bullshit, to put it pretty frankly. Yeah, and I don't really know exactly what causes it, and I still work towards unpacking it all. But I do remember the last serious relationship I had, the first time she went home, meaning to my parents' place with me. We left, and all she said was that was insane. And I said, yeah, I mean, they're pretty strange people. And she said, no, you are 100% a different person in that place. You are not the same in any regard, other than you have you maintain your physical form and you sound the same, but your personality is completely blank slated. It's just like the most milquetoast thing. There's nothing there. It's completely devoid of anything, because it's the defense mechanism.
Yeah. Well, I used to, my wife pointed this out to me one holiday season. It was probably our third Christmas together, and I was getting ready to go home for the holidays, and she said, I feel like you're going into a tunnel right around second week in November. Like that, one by one, my normal emotional reactions just kind of get shaved off until I'm this sleek, emotionless bullet who can pass through the holiday gauntlet without anybody getting a grip on me and fucking up my emotional well-being.
Sure. Yeah, and I mean, I have an incredibly complex extended family situation as well. While I was very close to my grandparents, my mother's side, I don't speak to anyone on it. There was a lot of legal bullshit, and one of her brothers has been to prison numerous times, and so that part's completely estranged. On my father's side, there's been a lot of he has 5 siblings, and within some of them, there's been, there's stuff, just like every human has, but it has made a weird dynamic. And so it's a little bit of I think, compared to a lot of people, when they think about the holidays and they think about family and just different things like that, none of that sounds great to me. It all sounds, if I could go somewhere And just, if I could go to Mexico City during Christmas and no one tell me it's Christmas, that would be preferable. And that's pretty much how I have felt for about the past 5 years.
Mexico City's pretty great.
Yeah. I mean, I've never been, but it looks pretty great.
Yeah.
And it's warm. That sounds cool.
It's not that warm.
I mean, it's warm enough.
Yeah. It's up a little bit.
I mean, my buddy went to Tulum for the holidays. I could do that. That's also pretty cool. I guess I would want to go to a foreign place just because then the ever-present American reminder of Christmas isn't there. It's not even getting away from the people and the parties involved. It's really just the whole song and dance. And I mean, that's a little bit of my own personal beliefs about capitalism in a modern era and stuff like that, but I just don't really care about Christmas.
I was in India once, just a couple weeks before Christmas, and there were just enough reminders that it was a certain time of year, but it's predominantly Hindu and Muslim nation. There are a few Christians who celebrate, but for the most part, it wasn't even on the radar. And it was pretty low-key.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if I experienced a healthy holiday season somewhere more than one time, I'd probably be okay with it. But I haven't.
Yeah.
So...
Have you ever been in a relationship where you felt unguarded? Was there ever a point in a relationship where you thought...
Yeah, there's been one.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Where you didn't have to build Fortress Lemmy?
Well, I guess I should rephrase. There's one that I was in where she really understood, and at least from like an ethos standpoint, not necessarily I understand every single occurrence that has happened. And there have been others where it was pretty close, but there was I mean, that's really that one that was like borderline healthy.
Yeah.
I had another one where she saw right through, and it was like unnerving, and it weirded me out, and I got way too close, way too quick, and it got incredibly sideways. But those are really the only instances. I don't. Yeah, I don't know. I could wax on it, but I don't think it's going to get any clearer.
Are you doing meds?
No, I did them. I had a really hard 2018, mostly because I let a lot of other things in my life get into a really bad position, and then because of that, I did stupid things, and in an attempt to regain some kind of autonomy in my life, even though they were really unhealthy decisions, and it ended up like coalescing in the beginning of the second quarter of 2018, and I went for, it was really bad. It was like early July. Was it? Maybe it was May. I don't know. It was really bad, and I had my first physical in a really long time, and I just felt like I should be pretty honest in that moment, and basically the doctor said that if you like the only way you can leave this office today is if you agree to take meds, otherwise I have to commit you to the hospital.
No shit.
So, and I had a tour the next day.
Did you express to that doctor that you were in danger of self-harming in any way?
Yeah. I mean, well, it's an inventory, so you take a thing, and I guess all my points added up to enough that could have been there. It wasn't, I guess it was just suicidal ideation more than anything in that moment. So I took a generic Lexapro for almost a year, and then all of a sudden the prescription was supposed to be good for a year, and then all of a sudden it wasn't, and it was just a whole like insurance thing to just get my money back for the physical, which was supposed to be comped, and I just honestly just didn't give a fuck. I just didn't care enough to deal with it to get these pills that really messed up my sleep.
Yeah.
And completely destroyed any sex drive I had. And the sleep was really the weird thing. I also had these weird, I don't really know what else to call it. I guess I kind of just called them brainstorms, where it just felt like all of a sudden something in my brain, just like someone just shook my head really hard for like a split second, but it would completely derail my train of thought. And I would get them randomly.
Was that during the withdrawal from the Lexapro?
No, that was on the Lexapro.
Because I've heard people talk about this sort of static shock feeling in your brain from coming off of it.
It definitely happened when I was coming off of it, and they were maybe a little more intense, but it happened on them. They would happen when I would sleep, and that's really where it would wake me. It would wake me up in the middle of the night, and so I would never sleep, more than 3-hour bursts. Did
it ever happen in the middle of a gig?
Oh yeah. I mean, they happened all the time.
That sounds awful.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely not preferred.
So you're off meds now.
Yeah, I don't know. The benefit, I think that it did the thing it needed to do in the moment. And that maybe it could be tweaked, or maybe there's a better one. I don't know. I'm definitely not anti-med. The thing about it was, I don't really particularly care for the just like, we have to guess. And I understand everybody's body's different and stuff like that. It's just because of the nature of my world, I can't deal with not having any idea about what's about to happen. Everything else in my life is completely fluid, more or less, because of work, or I'm going to be in Omaha tomorrow or whatever.
Yeah.
To have that thrown in there as another thing it just sounds like way too much to try to take on and maintain any level of professional ability.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I don't know. My therapist also hasn't she is just a psychologist, a doctor of psychology, not a medical doctor of psychiatry. So I don't really know her game on suggesting medication, but that hasn't been anything that we've discussed.
Yeah.
So I feel like she feels like there's been enough improvement, or there's enough cognitive understanding of what is going on that isn't necessary right now, or I don't know. I'm not really sure. And I even have a level of guardedness with her, and it's something that I definitely try to really work on. It's tough. I mean, she's been my therapist for well over a year at this point, and granted, I've been gone a lot, so I only see her when I'm home, and it's also not cheap. Even when she was within my insurance, it wasn't cheap. So I try to figure it all out and do it as often as I can, but yeah, I don't know. It's just there's a lot going on there.
Yeah.
Kind of lost my train of thought.
No, we were just talking about meds, and I was wondering what other you're doing therapy. You're not doing meds. Are you journaling at all? Do you journal?
No. I the hardest part, I think, about doing what I do for a living and trying to cope with this stuff is the complete lack of a schedule.
Yeah.
And it gets really hard I'm also incredibly private about stuff like that. My love life, my any of those sorts of things. So I will be also the schedule, combined with the fact that I would never want to write anything down where anyone could read it.
Yeah.
Freaks me out. So those two things, journaling, just I don't think I can get there. I have no idea how I would ever if there's even a way I could feel comfortable doing it.
Yeah. Maybe if you had a wood stove, every page went right in the fireplace.
Yeah, I guess then just I don't know. Even then that just seems wasteful.
Yeah, I think the work of journaling, though, is good for sort of determining where you're at. Like sitting down and writing everything down is good for kind of taking an inventory of your thoughts, feelings, fears, resentments, all those things, and getting them out in front of you so that it's not this sort of nebulous cloud. The problem, of course, is if you're on a tour and you have a notebook and you're talking honestly about what's going on in your head and someone else on the tour is being a dick and reads it, then now you've got a professional issue on your hands.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, and also exercise is one of those things that I've just been trying to figure out a good way to work into my world. It's been fairly difficult, which sounds silly. I know, because it's kind of like we all burn time doing something, but when you just don't have any kind of daily routine because every day is so different, it's I go from gigs where I'm on a bus to I'm in like a minivan and it's just two people. It's the world is, and everything in between. It's all so different, or where it's all fly dates, and it's just really hard to make a schedule out of it. And I honestly just like haven't. That's not saying it can't be done. It can. It's just that I haven't reached that point with it all that it's important enough to me, or like I'm desperate enough, or however you want to frame it. I just haven't found the place that I need to be to truly make it happen.
The thing about fly dates is you're usually traveling so light that a complete full extra set of clothing, running shoes, running shorts, running shirt, or whatever exercise equipment you need to take on the road is like, I don't think I have room for this.
Yeah, that's also very real. I'm not ever going to be a runner. I can't do it. I hated it. I've hated it my entire life. So if I do anything, I'm stationary bike. So like shoes matter, but definitely a little less.
Yeah.
They still need to obviously be comfortable and have some form of cushioning, but yeah, just not going to do the running thing.
So revisiting your therapist that you sent hurtling into traffic, given the sort of wisdom of some time having passed, like how do you feel about his suggestion that maybe you should like set a really hard boundary for your family?
Well, so I guess the caveat, I don't think, I should also say that I don't know that he was necessarily wrong. However, I do think he came in a little too hot.
Yeah.
That's more what I guess I mean by the whole thing. His point is no less valid, however.
Yeah, I guess the question is, do you feel like you're ever going to get to a point where you can have a family that like respects your emotional well-being?
I have no idea. My parents have gone through a number of changes over the past few years, mostly for the better. They have made some strides in improving themselves. However, your initial thing with any kind of therapy is normally to contain yourself to a large degree before you can even think about repairing other stuff, which is very similar to kind of the AA things. You need to repair the inside before you reach out and try to make amends for things you've done. And they're not young, they're not spring chickens. So like, I just don't know that they're going to get to that point that we can have a conversation about these things and make any kind of amends with it. What I've come maybe in the past month and a half to kind of really ponder about a lot of anxiety and about a lot of depression is a lot of it in a lot of like really self-destructive behavior, especially that's like substance-based or whatever, or other things, is it's really just we somewhere along the line feel like we've lost our autonomy.
Right.
And so in the case of the 12 steps, what they're doing is they're slowly teaching you to trust yourself again, that you are in control of this, that you go through it at your speed, and that you can make the amends when it's time for you to make the amends.
Right. Well, there's also the sponsor system where you have an accountability moment with someone who's been sober longer than you have.
Right.
Or in the case of like Codependence Anonymous or any of the other 12-step programs that deal with things other than substances, just someone who's been in recovery long enough to spot your bullshit.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And it's no different when you look at like a halfway house.
Yeah.
There's not the 12 steps involved, but the same thing. You have someone that is holding you accountable, but there's still enough leeway that you have to make your own decisions. And they're going to call you out if you're not, or they're going to congratulate you when you do them properly. Mm-hmm. They're there to be your external reinforcement of exploring your own autonomy again.
Yeah. So the struggle continues. You know, I know that you're still doing a lot of emotional work, just a lot of maintenance work, and sort of, as with every working musician, every day is an audition, every day is another sort of in a long line of proving yourself to other people, and that's got to be tough when your own internal barometer is swinging wildly about your value to yourself.
True. Yeah. I mean, I definitely struggle with it. You just in a minor thing, when I had this one gig that I ended up getting let go from, I turned down 2 or 3 other ones that have gone on to already be more successful and busier than what I was doing, which definitely stings. But I guess the point there is that you don't really ever know where anything's going to go or where it's going to come from, and that definitely that only reinforces the feeling of everything as an audition. However, it has also taught me that I kind of just have to release these things, and they can be what they can be. And I've had some not great interactions, some of them my fault, some of them just misunderstandings recently that were more or less casual and not in any kind of professional sense. And I can all I can do is own my part in it, and to some degree, like whether somebody wants to think differently of me is purely just that's in their game, that's in their court.
You've had some moments of where things got so dark that you were actually contemplating suicide.
I mean, yeah, numerous times in my life, and probably not nearly as long ago as I would wish I could admit.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely it's an ever-present thing. It always reaches this point whenever it shows up. I always kind of refer to it as it started with an ex-girlfriend. I didn't really know how to talk about it, and it was easier to give some kind of personification to it or whatever we want to call it. So I just called it the bear. Very similar to how Churchill called his the black dog.
Yeah.
It made it a little easier to talk about at times, but yeah, I mean, it's still around. But effectively, the thing that I kind of always end up at when it gets there is that I'm either going to do it or I'm not. And if I'm not, then I'm just really just wasting my own time thinking about it. So I should just change stuff, or just, I mean, for like, the shitter to get off the pot kind of situation. It always kind of ultimately ends up there, and it'll go away for a while. But since I've really gotten to the point of having some kind of plan, it's probably been since 2018 that it got to a point where I was really trying to figure out a way to do it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think it was pretty heavy. I mean, even it's been within the past month that it's been there. It's like kind of never goes away. It'll just like hibernate for X amount of time and then show back up, kind of like cicadas.
Yeah. Sadly, it's not every 17 years, though.
Yeah, that'd be a lot easier to manage.
Yeah. What do you do to manage it at those times? Just live through it?
Yeah, just sit in it. I stopped drinking like a year and a half ago. And yeah, I mean, there's nothing really you can do, especially when you're on the road and you're just sitting in a car and sitting in a green room or sitting in a restaurant at 2 a.m. There's nothing you can do except just sit in it and sit with it. It's just kind of right there with you the whole time. And it's not fun.
Yeah.
But you also can't outrun it. You know, that's all any substance is for a lot of people, is just a way to try to outrun it. And you can't, because it's persistent. It's just always there.
Yeah. You've reached out to me at those times, a lot of the time.
Yeah. It's a tough thing to do, to reach out to anyone in those moments. It always feels really rude in a way to just be like, hey, can I hit you with a truck right now?
Well, I think that because for a lot of people who've never been there, it can sound like you're hitting the panic button. Like,
right,
this is an emergency and I need you to deal with this now. Whereas if you talk to someone who's been there, it's like, oh, the bear caught up with you again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
And you gotta choose really carefully.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it'll go real sideways.
Yeah. You'll end up locked up somewhere.
Yeah. Or
that's not gonna help.
Or even something like so much weirder that you could never predict. You know, there was one of my ex's sister's friends took his own life, and just basically everyone's kind of like handling of it and the leading up to it, with the exception of basically her sister, was a case study in how not to handle it.
Yeah.
And it really only exasperated the issue, and it was really unfortunate. Yeah. I mean, that's just the nature of it. Sometimes is that you have to be careful, and it becomes problematic when you don't have people in your life, because then you don't have a choice in who you can talk to per se. You know, you're considerably more limited in who you feel okay. So until it reaches the point that it just kind of boils over, and it's whoever's there in that moment that it boils over. And that can be the worst possible case scenario sometimes.
Yeah, that can be a real professional liability.
Yeah, well, I mean, not even in the case of some like leading a life like mine. I just mean in a general sense. You could happen to be at your parents' if your parents are the people that are really the impetus for all of it.
Yeah.
You know, or something along those lines, or even worse.
Does that happen to you?
No, definitely not. I can't.
You can't open up that far with your folks.
Oh no, I'm just trying to think of what's like the highest security thing I can think of, and
DEFCON 1.
No, I mean I'm just trying to think of. I can't come up with a good government one, because it just seems like there are leaks from every part of this administration from every angle.
You mean like Black Skunk Works level security?
Yeah, I mean it's like NORAD.
Yeah.
When I'm at my parents'.
Yeah.
I mean, my parents didn't know that I lived with one of my exes, you know, wasn't my ex at the time, obviously.
Yeah.
I didn't tell them. They showed up, and that's when they found out. Like, it's like I said before, like information becomes ammunition.
Right.
And if the less you give, the less you can take, the less you could theoretically get flung back at you.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you don't tell them anything.
Hey, Crash and Ride would like to let you know about a new industry-wide initiative focused on mental health called Backline. Backline is a hub for artists, industry professionals, and their families to quickly and easily access mental health and wellness resources. Backline has partnered with leading support organizations and care providers to streamline access to services specifically geared towards the music industry. Go to www.backline.care to get the support that you need to thrive both on and off the road. The way that Backline works is you contact them via their website or their 800 number, and they will connect you with a caseworker. That caseworker will be familiar with resources in your area to get you the mental health care that you need. If you need to talk to a therapist, they can put you in touch with a therapist. If you need to talk to a psychiatrist and be evaluated for meds, they have a list of psychiatrists. They have resources for inpatient therapy. They can put you in touch with sober companions. If you need someone to travel with you while you're on the road and help you stay out of trouble, Backline is a really end-to-end comprehensive solution for people who are struggling in the music industry. Now, a little closer to home, if you're in the Athens, Georgia area and you're a musician struggling with anxiety and depression, you can contact Nucci Space at 706-227-1515 or go to nuci.org. That's nucci.org. Nucci Space is a nonprofit musicians resource focused on suicide prevention. Here's how Nucci's works. If you contact them and you say, hey, look, I'm in crisis, whether you're a musician or not, they'll connect you with resources in the Athens, Georgia area. If you're a musician, that health care will be subsidized. In my own case, I was able to see a counselor for $15 or $20 a session. If you're not a musician, they'll do their best to connect you with low-cost or sliding scale options for mental health care in Athens. Nucci Space provides a lot of resources for musicians in the Athens area. They have low-cost practice spaces. They have a gear sale where they're constantly selling secondhand gear. They've got a low-cost recording studio. They're really just an amazing asset to the Athens, Georgia music scene, but their primary mission is helping people who are depressed or anxious get better. Go to nuci.org, that's nucci.org, or call 706-227-1515. And finally, no matter where you are, if you're struggling with anxiety and depression and you're contemplating self-harm, you can always call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255. That's 1-800-273-TALK. It's 24/7. It's free. It's confidential. They have trained volunteers to help get you through your crisis and get you the help that you need. Call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255 or go to suicidepreventionlifeline.org. What do you think next steps are? You got any thoughts about that?
Well, I guess the caveat in kind of all this that is going to make this answer a little more complicated and not seem as straightforward is that there is a little bit of a wrinkle in my, that's not really a good word for it, but I take care of a family member who has a health issue, and I have a small stipend that I get from other family, but that definitely does not cover their life. So that is a thing I do, and to some degree, it hasn't sidetracked what I do, but it has changed what I am working on to a degree.
Yeah.
Because not only do I also have this kind of added responsibility / stress, whatever. I also just kind of have to shift because I need to maintain in that regard as well. So I'm effectively having to become, in a way, having never been a parent, there's a little bit of a parental nature you have to take on in a situation like that. A caretaker position, it's very similar, I guess, at least to me it is. So I have had to explore that part of me and really kind of come to some terms with that. So it has mildly diverted some resources in my development for how to cope with that, which was, definitely wasn't the greatest timing. But you don't get to pick those things.
Yeah.
Ideally,
what would next steps be?
Just in mental health development, or?
Yeah. Maybe taking some of the pressure off. There's a lot of pressure on you. Like, you're not in a steady gig right now. And So you've got to be out there playing at 110%, and the off chance that your next gig happens to show up to see the show.
Sure.
And you're...
Well, the other reality is that even if that were the case, because of how Nashville works, I would still I could have a very good gig in city standards, but I would still, because of what my monetary needs are with this situation, I would have to do something during the week that I'm at home from the weekend warrior thing. So the reality of it is that I pretty much work almost every day in some capacity. So I work at a drum store if I'm home, let's say. I work at a drum store at least 2 days a week. Possibly more. I do a number of side jobs. I build websites. I will sub on any gig anybody needs me to.
You're hustling.
Yeah, in the purest sense, because I just don't know when the gig will come. Yeah. So if this ability to make X dollars shows up, I do it. And I would like to, I guess a next step is I would love to not have to do that. I would love to have something more steady that allows me to not feel so scattered. If it's all music, it's a little easier, but since this isn't, it's a little all over the place.
Yeah.
I end up spending a lot of catch-up time every time I build a new website, just because I have to get back into the zone of it, or the flow,
right,
for lack of a better phrase. But I don't know. I guess I would like to learn to manage my anxiety specifically in a gig setting more, and being able to come to terms with that, being able to find a healthier way to cope with the rejection of gigs. I do really envy the people that can just let it roll off. It's just that's such an alien thought for me. I can't even really process it.
Yeah. You think it's part of just their basic personality, or is it just from years of doing it?
Probably both.
Yeah.
To some degree. I would say that there are definitely people who just handle, I think if you have a healthier upbringing, you're more naturally inclined to be okay if someone's not okay with something you do. You're just more secure within yourself, and that allows you to truly be you and not really care. And I think a lot of it is also, if it's not that, then there's also the whole experience. You've just been through it. You know how to talk yourself out of it. You understand enough cognitively,
right,
that you can parse the pieces together.
Well, I generally wind these things up with 10 questions.
Okay.
I know you've heard one or two of these.
Yeah.
So you know what's coming.
More or less.
You want to jump into it?
Yeah.
All right, man. What's the fondest memory you have of a meal that you've had?
Ooh, that's a tough one. There's so many.
I remember, and that you once said to me that a criticism you received from an ex was, when we go out to a restaurant, you're going because there's delicious food there, and I'm going because it's a social situation where I can be seen. And I was like, that's what restaurants are for. It's for food.
Yeah, the reality of it is that anything can be converted or perverted into some other form over time. Is the politic of the world.
Yeah, but you and I often find ourselves in these little gas station taco places.
Oh yeah. But in today's world, that doesn't mean that you still can't go there to be seen.
Wow.
I don't know, man. There's so many food things in my world. For me to have never worked in the food industry in any capacity, it's just food has been very important in my life. It was very much a paternal grandmother thing that she stayed at home, she cooked, So a lot of my really early memories of food come from her and dishes she would make. So there's a lot of fond ones there. I mean, there's also a lot of really amazing foods that I've had because I've been very fortunate in being able to travel the world and to travel just the United States and other things. And food is definitely an exciting point of that for me, and it's a way that I experience the world. I think it's you learn a lot about a culture. You learn a lot about the people through it, and I definitely, there's a very heavy sense of adventure with food for me. I will eat pretty much anything once, at least. But
I think it's also important to mention, though, and we haven't even touched on your work as a visual artist, that you're a photographer and an artist, and that you did a series of plates that were photographs of the chaos of your home, your old home.
Yes. So the pictures started as I took them. They were the first photos, definitely in the first 20 photos I took with a camera I got 2 years ago. And I just published them, and the group together was called Home is a 4-letter word. Because at a certain point in my life, home doesn't, it's just a word. It's just that. It doesn't have any kind of connotation to me anymore. If you asked me where home was, I would probably say where I live currently, but it's not a home in a more general loving sense. It's just a physical place that I reside.
That question is coming, by the way.
And so then I decided to put them on plates because of how we can have these super complicated feelings about our home and our childhood and our upbringing. The same thing, food is very it has its own set of memories tied to it, just like if you've eaten something before and it made you sick, or if it gave you heartburn, or any of these things like that. There are all these little tiny memories, but there's also so much other memory stuff tied up in it. And
this question gets at the whole reason you put those photos on plates.
Yes.
The reason that the first question at the end of a mental health podcast is, what is your fondest memory of a meal that you've had? Because for me, there's a transaction about making food for people that is an expression of affection and caring and love. And if somebody misses that opportunity by sort of just turning in a half-assed performance on making food for someone, it for me that's significant.
Well, it says I think if they turn in a half-hearted meal, I should rephrase this. If they turn in a meal that tastes poor, but they clearly did their best,
that's different.
But if they turn in a half-hearted meal that's a little bit, I don't really care, they have a blasé attitude to it, then that's a different thing and speaks about how they view the interaction.
Right. Well, for me, so this is a cultural thing, right? Like, my love language is cornbread. Like, the 5 love languages, whatever they are.
Yeah.
I'm sort of vaguely aware of that book, and I know that, like, they're like acts of service and
words of affirmation. There's a bunch.
Right. But mine is 100% like, I've made you something delicious, and it will sustain you, and it's good for you, and it'll make you happy.
Sure.
And not everybody's like that. It's hard for me to accept that.
Oh yeah, not everyone. The other thing though, with those, and in this instance as well, I think that there are how they like to show it, and there's also how they like to receive it, and those aren't necessarily in the same order or weighting.
Yeah.
And I do think there are a lot of people who like to receive it that way, that may not be able to deliver it or have any. It may be lower on their scale to deliver it, even though it's a high thing they value to receive.
Yeah.
But if that makes sense, it's a complicated headspace.
Yeah, I'm still sort of digesting that. Like, so to speak. No pun intended.
Yeah. For example, like let's take the words of affirmation. Like they may like to receive those, but they may not. That may not be how they generally communicate. It may be considerably lower in terms of their natural inclination to show their love.
It's funny now that you mention it. Like I love to make extravagant, delicious meals for people, but if I have to sit there while someone does that for me, and there's no way for me to make that a two-way street, like I can't help, or like I go a little stir crazy.
Sure.
Like,
and yeah, it's all very complicated, but I don't know that what I'm saying about it is in that book, but it's just definitely something that I have noticed, because I do not want like words of affirmation are pretty high on mine. However, it's hard for me to give them, if that makes any sense. And I tend to show mine. My number one way to show it is acts of service, which is effectively cooking.
Yeah. Or playing drums.
Or playing drums, or doing the dishes, or whatever.
Yeah.
But I guess to like more or less try to get this back on the rails of the initial question.
Oh yeah, sorry.
It's really hard because there are so many meals, and I tend to do a lot of my networking that way, over coffee, over meals, because it means a lot to me. And it's it's two things I enjoy, like hanging out with a person that I like, and also we get to eat or consume something that is tasty or refreshing, or whatever we want to call it. There are a number of really great meals I've had in my life, but I would say that the ones that I've also had equally terrible meals, which is something that I am kind of working on as a secondary follow-up to the food as a four-letter word, is just a series of recipes about all the meals that are probably the like ones that I think about the most prominently from my childhood, whether they're good or whether they're bad. And having them on. Anyway, I would say that the meals that my grandmother made for me that were specifically catered to me are the ones that would stand out in that regard. Like she would make biscuits, but she knew that I liked like one big one versus multiples. So she would make one large one for me in a separate pan. She made peanut brittle every year for people for Christmas. I didn't really like peanuts as a kid, so she figured out how to make it without peanuts and not burn it. And I would have like my own little piece, or any piece that she could like only have like a couple of peanuts in. She would like push it to the side.
I just had this insight. So I was thinking about like little Lemuel not liking peanuts or liking one big biscuit. Like there are ways that kids who feel out of control of their lives will assert tiny bits of control. And one of them is through being very picky, a selective eater.
Totally.
And your grandma and her love for you was like,
you want this? I'll do this.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Because she probably figured you needed that somewhere in your life.
Yeah, and she may not have even thought about it in those kind of terms. I think that she was just like, this means a lot to him, and I would like to do it for him. It may have been that simple.
Yeah.
It still had the profound effect of someone saying, to me as a kid, someone saying, what you want matters. And that's not something that children hear often.
Certainly some kids never hear it.
Sure. And so it's, I guess that's why ultimately at the end of the day, all of the food stuff traces back to there. So for me to not pick one of those kind of meals would be disingenuous to who I am at a very core.
Yeah. Second question, what's the most frightened you've ever been?
I would have to check the chicken house we mentioned earlier when I was a child at night, and especially in the rural South in the winter, it gets dark pretty early, and so by a reasonable hour of your last check of like 8 o'clock or something, it's pretty much pitch black. And there were always, I mean, I grew up literally next to the interstate. I could see it from my bedroom window. And so there's just always sounds, you know, weird car sounds. There's also coyotes and stuff, but you're a kid. You don't know what everything sounds like. And you just get freaked out because there's also just things that aren't going to hurt you. Deer, possum that are just like making noises and like doing their thing, living their lives. And they freak you out. And there were a couple of times where I got really freaked out because I heard something and I was alone and it was complete darkness. And I was pretty afraid then. I guess as an adult, the only time I've been like truly afraid of something was I was pretty worried when I fractured my humerus. And I was just worried that I would never be able to play like I could before again.
Humerus is the big bone in your
upper arm.
Yeah, and you fell and broke that.
Yeah. So it has a plate. That'll be in my arm forever. But when they put the plate in, they have to move your radial nerve. It causes radial nerve palsy, which can take 4 to 8 months to heal. So you're just kind of in this limbo land where you can't lift your wrist, you can't open your fingers. And you're just chilling, hoping that it's going to come back and not require a second surgery to fix it. And so the only way I dealt with the fear of that was purely just through alcohol at the time.
So you moved to Nashville to be a professional session drummer, and then you've been there about 2.5 years.
Oh, I know. I had not even been there a year, and I fractured my arm.
Just shattered it.
Yeah, it's a spiral displaced fracture about an inch and a half above the elbow. I was in the middle of I had a session and then we had a day off and we were going to finish it that Monday and it happened on a Sunday night. Not great.
No. I didn't know you were drinking heavily in the wake of that.
I mean, there was literally nothing else to do. I can't use a computer. I can't use a mouse. I can't do anything. I can't do dishes. I can't cook.
Yeah.
I was literally pretty worthless. So I can't even write. I can't, the mouse that I owned at the time was right-handed specific.
Oh god.
So I couldn't use that, and you have to type with one hand. Everything took 3 times as long minimum.
Yeah.
Eating large burritos from Chipotle, surprisingly hard.
With one hand.
With one hand, yeah. I just kind of ate garbage because I was broke and trying to survive and couldn't do dishes and felt guilty at a certain point, relying heavily on my roommate at the time, who I didn't really know. And
is that Mick?
That was Mick, yeah. Mick Leonardi. Mick's great dude. He put up with that. I had known him 3 days before I broke my arm. And then he was just thrust into this super heavy situation. Good dude, though.
Yeah, I like that guy a lot. Of all the things in your life that you've lost, what is the thing you regret losing the most?
I regret losing my temper in moments when I should have done better.
Yeah.
There's things that otherwise I don't really miss, and I think that loss is an important thing we all have to go through. I mean, it was definitely tough to lose. I lost 3 of the 4 grandparents within a 7-month time frame.
Oof.
Oh, I guess it was a whole year. It's more like a whole year. But anyway, it was pretty gnarly.
It's interesting to me that someone who struggles with not being able to control the impulse to shut down completely and show no emotion, like your regret for losses, that you actually did show some emotion a couple of times.
Well, the problem is because the only thing that, just like a fortress in battle, the only thing that comes out of it is fire.
Right.
It's every emotion in my childhood home was filtered into basically 3. It was filtered into some form of weird form of excitement, we'll just say. So that's any kind of positive feeling, filtered into anger, or filtered into I'm just gonna call it a negative, because I don't really know exactly what realm. And that's everything. And there's way more emotions than that, and they cover a much larger scale. Everything was just created into this, forced into this more trinary kind of world. And more often than not, most emotions were filtered into anger. So that's kind of how I was raised. And it took a number of years to break.
Yeah.
And And I definitely have lost it with with loved ones and people that were close to me. And it used to just be stop it, and that was all I was trying to do. And now it's the fire can still show up, but I don't have to like grab it like a dog lunging and grabbing it by the collar quite as badly as I used to.
Yeah.
But I would say that's my number one regret of things that I have lost.
Tell me about a time you received an act of kindness from a stranger.
I guess the first one that comes to mind, it's kind of a stranger. I was on tour and I was in Texas, and I believe we were in Houston or San Antonio, and I have a friend who the band and everyone lived in Athens, and my friend lived in Athens, but his family lived there, and the van had shredded a belt tensioner. So it needed to be repaired, and it was going to be towed, but there were too many of us to tow the trailer, and the people.
Yeah.
And I was trying to minimize costs, and I happened to just think, oh, man, his parents live here. I wonder if they could give us a ride. And they totally did, and they didn't know us or anything, and it was very kind. And I do think about that quite often because he was willing to just like call his parents up to just be like, hey, can you help my friend that you've never met?
Yeah.
And we'll probably never see again.
That's amazing.
So that's the one that immediately came to mind.
Yeah. Well, that and Mick.
And Mick, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he was kind of stuck with me. We were in a lease.
What's your favorite place to gig?
Oh. I like Spain a lot.
Yeah.
And Italy, I guess that whole like Mediterranean section of the three, Spain, France, Italy, is a really nice zone, obviously. Hong Kong was also really great. In the U.S., there's a lot of cool places. I guess it becomes not even about the venues, which sounds terrible. It's just kind of the towns, like New York is cool, but I hate touring there personally. I just have never done it on a regular enough time with a big enough gig that it's not a nightmare.
I hurt my back so bad one time trying to unload at, I think it was Pianos, Lower East Side.
Yeah.
Just trying to unload in the middle of the street, reaching into the back of the van, and pulling from the center of my back instead of from my legs, and just having a muscle spasm.
That sounds right. Yeah. That sounds like New York.
Just trying to hurry because you're blocking traffic. There's nowhere to park.
Yeah. That's it's great. So much fun. I mean, every town, so many towns, even towns that aren't huge ones, have great stuff, I guess would be a more like realistic answer. Like Florida's not always super amazing to tour from a turnout standpoint, but and this is a tip from you. Like I love playing Tampa because I'm going to go to La Teresita.
I love that place.
Yeah, exactly. And then
the Ulrys are there. Keith and Susie, they have that record store.
Yeah,
they're amazing.
Yeah, and like that's great. And then Omaha, Nebraska has if you play like I think it's the Listening Room there. That's cool. There's that whole little section's got some cool stuff. Every little, so many markets have a cool thing, whether it's a major city or not. And I like Milwaukee a lot. I played with a band that was based out of there for like a year and a half, and I got to spend a lot of time there, and I really enjoyed it.
I love Milwaukee so much. I actually tried to talk my wife into moving there because I just love the fact that it's so close to Chicago, and yet it doesn't have the anxiety level that Chicago churns. I lived in Chicago for a while, and it was just like, oh, this is why I'm not really cut out for urban life. But then I experienced it in Milwaukee and was like, this feels somehow more laid back. It's hard to describe exactly what it is.
No, yeah, that makes sense to me. It's definitely a lower stakes version, like lower stakes city. that's not a knock against it. It's just the nature of it.
Well, when you're deciding, I mean, when you're talking about that, it's like, what's the worst thing that can happen? In Chicago, you could sleep in the park and freeze to death and die. Whereas in Milwaukee, you might get on someone's nerves because you were on their couch for too long.
Yeah.
Like it's different.
Totally.
It feels like a really big college town to me.
And yeah, in a way, I would agree with that.
I mean, there are sections of Milwaukee that are really desperate.
Oh yes, for sure. I could never do the winters there. I got stuck in a snowstorm there one time, and it was so gnarly and brutal. And this little Georgia guy is not built out for that stuff, man.
Yeah.
So,
sort of following along that question, visa and income considerations aside, if you could live anywhere in the world, where would you live?
I think 5 years ago that answer would, or 10 years. After the first time I went, that answer would have been Hong Kong, but China's gotten too weird, and all that stuff there is so gnarly. I think I'd probably live in like that section near the Swiss Italian border, kind of just where the Alps have ended and it started to become flat.
Yeah,
like I don't know, or maybe as far down as La Spezia.
Yeah.
I don't know. I like that zone a lot.
Yeah.
I had a really great day off there one time. That was pretty magical.
Who were you touring with then?
That was with J.P. Harris.
Yeah.
Yeah, we played a festival in the middle of Euro Cup. And Italy was in the finals. It was an intense time. But it was cool. And the show got moved, and on paper everything sounded like it was going to become a terrible day and a frustrating day, and it was honestly just everyone was so awesome and super cool and really wanted to show us their town and experience, and it was really great.
Italians are flexible. They can turn on a dime.
Yeah.
I think it's just because that's just kind of the nature of the beast.
Sure.
Yeah. Do you have an ideal musical instrument, and if so, do you already own it?
I really wish that I was a really good piano player. I don't own a piano.
Physical, is there a snare drum or kick drum or kit?
I don't know. Probably. I probably owned it. I either own it or I have owned it.
Right.
I have owned a lot of gear, and I've definitely gotten considerably less precious about it for a number of reasons. And I have tried to whittle my stuff down to having what I consider to be the essentials to do most things that I'm going to be called for. And, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of reasons for that, but.
What snare drum goes to the most gigs for you?
Probably it hasn't recently because some stuff has, just what I've been doing shifted, but probably of the drums that I own snare drums that I own that have been to the most gigs, it would be my 5x15 Sugar Walnut.
Oh, yeah?
Mm-hmm. I keep it tuned about medium, and it just for Nashville stuff. It's either that or a 60s Acrolite, but it's
that was the answer I was expecting. Was the 60s Acrolite.
Well, I mean, just so much of what I do is so backbeat oriented that, and where we're at with what we want sonically as a popular culture, the 15 just kind of sits in a nicer place.
Yeah.
So I use that a lot more than most people would think. And when I take it, everyone's like, wow, that's like a great snare drum for this.
Yeah.
It just does a thing.
Yeah.
It's not for everything. I can't use it in I don't know I should say can't. I haven't used it with Reed on the Kudzu Duo stuff. I have used it in the normal iterations of Reed's things where we're going to have a more full band.
Yeah.
Because it sits in a nice place.
Yeah. Is there an instrument that you've sold or lost or had stolen that you desperately wish you could have back?
The The only one these days that I really, really wish that I hadn't gotten rid of is an 8x14 Gretsch Rosewood. Actually, that was when I met you. As what I was playing that on a session at 1093 here in town.
Natalie
Riccio,
yeah.
Yeah. And it had Yamaha wood hoops, and I had named it Dikembe Mutombo. And it was a great snare drum, and they don't make it anymore. I don't really know why I called it that. I just did one day.
Yeah.
And yeah, you can't make. No one makes it anymore. Like Gretsch doesn't. They make it, but they don't make it in an 8, and they come up so infrequently for sale. That's really the only one that I think I really and I might get it and find one and be like, I hate this.
Yeah.
Which is very likely. But yeah, I don't really. There's anything else I've been able to track back down, more or less, I think.
Yeah. If you could be a guest with any performer or band for one song at a show, what would that performer or band be, and what would the song be?
Can they be alive, or do they have to be dead, or both?
It could be. It doesn't matter.
Okay. Bring Me the Disco King with David Bowie.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We know the guy who played that part.
Well, that would have been that song's Chamberlain, Matt Chamberlain.
Matt Chamberlain.
Yeah, it's the only track he played on that record.
Oh, I thought it was be Sterling.
Sterling's on everything else except that one.
Huh.
But yeah, it's I don't know. I just really like that song a lot, and I believe when he did that on the reality tour, it was just him and piano. I don't think there was actually any other accompaniment, or there may have been a simple track.
Yeah.
But I do remember that was the first thing that he played, I think, on the reality tour DVD after an intermission.
Yeah.
Or I mean, it would anything with Bowie or Sting, I would take.
Yeah.
In a heartbeat, even if it was like you said, one song, and I had to give up a whole year's worth of touring. If I could monetarily figure it out, I would.
Yeah. Last question. If you can imagine a taxi that can go anywhere in time or space, it's not constrained by reality as we know it, and you climb into this taxi and you say to the driver, hey man, take me home.
Oh God, I don't know. I mean, I think the Ridley Scott in me says I have to say Los Angeles, November 2019.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I'm not really a person that feels like I was born in a wrong time. I don't know time feels specifically that it calls to me on a regular. I do sometimes wish. I don't wish. I just would. I wonder how different I would be if I were, say, 5 to 10 years older and just the internet wasn't a thing until I was an adult. Just to kind of, or even a whole life without the internet, just to see how it would be, because it's just fundamentally changed the way that social structures work and the way that knowledge flows.
Yeah.
And I do think that while we have access to a lot of that, our exploration of what we know, of each little fact that we know, and kind of contemplating it is dramatically different, which is why you have more homogenization of things, because we're not really taking a thing and let it morph into something else. We just move on to the next thing.
Yeah, it's interesting. Touring before the internet versus now, cities had a different feel.
Totally.
Nashville wasn't like anywhere else in the world.
Right.
And now Nashville's just, I mean, I like Nashville, but it kind of overshot the mark for me of it used to be that after 11 o'clock in the morning, you couldn't find a decent cup of coffee because it was a 9 to 5 town, and coffee was a breakfast drink. But now you can have your choice of $6 highly acidic iced coffees.
Yeah.
And I'm not really all that keen on.
Oh yes, my lifeblood.
Yeah, or $6. So yeah.
Yeah, well, that's fair.
Yeah, and and there's there's a punk rock donut shop in every major town in America, and
the weirdest one to come about of all that is definitely that to me. I don't get it, but whatever. I don't have to get it.
Yeah,
they're not for me. That's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's just I kind of even early on in my touring thing, it would have been early internet in terms of people using it on a regular basis. It's like 2005. So the internet is still definitely already a thing, but it's not grown into the behemoth that it is now.
At that point, it wasn't an arbiter of culture.
Right, exactly. And I remember Houston being very like, that's for some reason that's the town that stood out to me. It was just so bizarre. It's so expansive.
Huge mishmash of cultures too.
Yes. That's what I intensely remember.
I think that's still there though. I think that you can still like eat New Delhi street food for breakfast and like tacos for dinner, and then in the middle like maybe get some Turkish food. Like,
yeah, and I think that there are a lot of towns like that. I guess just like I think a lot of people today really like New York still or New York or Boston or San Francisco, because when you walk the streets, they actually have a pretty unique feel, at least to me.
New Orleans is the king.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yes.
I should say the queen. New Orleans is the queen of like a distinctive urban feel. Like no place feels like New Orleans.
I would agree with that. I would agree with that completely. San Francisco is pretty high on that just because of so many, like the weirdest color palette of all the homes.
Yeah.
It's really interesting to me still. I think about it, especially when you drive. Oh man, what is that? It's a smaller college, and I am blanking on the name of it right now, but it's when you're going to drive north, like from SFO, and you kind of go around the city more or less, and you're kind of
and you come over that hill,
and
you can see all the houses on I don't know the name.
And they're just the colors are just so insane, and they're all over the place, and it's beautiful, and you don't see that anywhere.
Yeah. My friend Deanne, who lives in San Francisco, I think lives in that neighborhood.
Yeah, it's cool. I mean, it's not the greatest, but it's in terms of a lot of things, it's a little dilapidated and a lot of like infrastructure ways, but it's I think it has a very distinct feel, and so does New York, because it just does, and that's changing, and there is a lot of the ubiquity. New York is having a different form of ubiquity spread throughout it, to where I feel like a lot of the sections that felt certain ways don't feel that way anymore as the money shows up.
Yeah.
Boston definitely still has that its own thing, though.
You know, it's interesting. I know that about Boston, but I've never really fully embraced that city because it doesn't seem like it has any real interest in fully embracing me.
Well, I would think Boston doesn't really have any interest in embracing anybody. That's part of Boston.
Yeah.
It's very gritty in that way.
Yeah. Man, this has been great. I'm really grateful you're able to do it.
Yeah, me too. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah.
All right, that's episode 51, our interview with Lemuel Hayes. I really love that guy so much. It's we're so close, and I'm really glad he was able to come do the show. Thanks to Jake Kreger. You know, I've been calling him our erstwhile producer forever because he's kind of like nobody really gets paid, and he's way the hell up in Virginia and mostly does this over email. But I found out this week that erstwhile doesn't mean what I thought it did. It means former. He's not former, he's current. He's just, you know, this whole thing's kind of a shoestring operation. So he's our producer, like I'm the host. He sends me notes after every show to tell me what was good about the show or what wasn't. And so, you know, if the show's better now than it was the first time you heard it, that's Jake. He's a really great guy. Thanks, Jake. So I also want to thank our two main sponsors, of course, Jittery Joe's and Greer Amplification. But also, this show is made possible by listeners like you making small contributions at our Patreon site. That's www.patreon.com/crashandride. You can make a $5 or $10 monthly contribution. It helps us keep going. Helps me pay bills. Helps me buy new water heaters when they break. So, you know, if you want to help out the show, throw down there. Thanks to Gene Wolfolk and the Powder Room. The band The Powder Room provides all of the music that you hear on Crash and Ride, the music that you hear under this voiceover right now, the music at the beginning of the show, the little bumper, the music under the halftime part. That's all the Powder Room. Most of it is from their first album, Curtains. I did not play on that record, but it's a great record. The part in the sort of the mental health announcements part, that's from the album Lucky, which I did play on. You can find all of that music and more at thepowderroom.bandcamp.com. Download those records, throw them a few bucks, and hey, Gene has a new band called Dream Tent. Go to dreamtent.bandcamp.com. That's DREAMTENT.bandcamp.com and check out Dream Tent. It's really cool, atmospheric, shoegazy stuff. This is his newest project, and I think it's every bit as good as the other things that he's done. I think he's a brilliant guy, and I like him a lot. So go check out Dream Tent. Finally, thanks to Heil Audio for these two PR40 microphones I got such a good deal on. You know, I used to use the PR40 when I was a recording engineer in the studio. I used them on snare drum, kick drum, sometimes bass cabinet. They're incredibly versatile microphones. I've also discovered now that they're great broadcast microphones. I've been using them on my podcast now for about 7 months, and I really like them. If you're thinking about upgrading the microphones on your podcast, check out the Heil PR40. All right. I think that about covers it. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being a part of this. Thanks for reaching out. I enjoy your emails very much. crashandride@protonmail.com. I'm hoping to get a song explication out by midweek this week, so stay tuned for that. And until we speak again, take care of yourself. Be kind to yourself. Ask for help if you need it. Go see live music. Support your favorite band. And remember, loud guitars save lives.